Hokie Hangover, live on YouTube, youtube.com/@Hokie Hangover Podcast. It is the bye week. We've reached the halfway point in the season. Virginia Tech is 3-3. Do not play until a week from tonight against Boston College.
It's always one of the things I've always thought was weird about the ACC's bye weeks is that generally, whenever Virginia Tech has a bye week, it's really not a full bye week because they have to play the Thursday that the week after.
Yeah, it's like you get 2 days chopped off that bad boy, and that's where we're at. So Virginia Tech will play next Thursday night. We will be back, honestly, probably Sunday or Monday to get the preview out. Maybe we'll just do it Sunday, honestly, because it's a short week. Give it some runway. Yeah. We're on our Sunday recording schedule anyway, so we'll talk about that afterwards. We haven't even floated that yet. Andrew's not with us tonight. Haven't even checked with you on your schedule, Ricky.
You couldn't tell.
Yeah, Andrew's not here. He is not feeling well. He said he'll be back for the preview. That's fine. We are going to talk through the state of this football team through the opening 6 or so weeks of the season. We've touched on this, and I posed a question at the end of the last podcast about what we think Virginia Tech's record is going to be at the end of the year and how they're going to fare the rest of the way. We'll get to that later. But overall, Ricky, thoughts just high level on where this team is at 3-3, losses to Vanderbilt and Rutgers and Miami, wins, of course, over Marshall, ODU, and Stanford. How are we feeling?
I think a few weeks ago we were not feeling all that great, considering it seemed like Virginia Tech hadn't really played up to their potential, even through the Old Dominion game. I was there for that one, and they were able to put the Monarchs away, but you didn't really feel like Virginia Tech played exceptional football to the level that we think that they can.
Agree.
Obviously, the Rutgers loss was pretty frustrating. We're now at a point, though, in the year where we've seen some more results from those other teams, and I think it's changed how we have to look at those other losses. When Virginia Tech lost to Vanderbilt in week 1, a lot of us were looking at this team as this is a perennial doormat. This team's not any good. They don't have any talent. They're not able to win games. Vanderbilt stole one. They're going to win 4 games this year, yada, yada, yada. And, Vanderbilt is certainly flawed. I think that's, to put it nicely.
Lost to Georgia State,
Yes.
So, there are some flaws in there still.
Yeah, so you can't ignore that. However, their win over Alabama obviously changes how you have to view that team. Yeah, it's a
pretty
solid
good
win.
Pretty good.
It might be the best win in the country.
Pretty good.
So all of a sudden that Vanderbilt loss doesn't feel the same. Then you look at a team like Rutgers, who is playing pretty well up to this point, despite, in my opinion, not really having a good passing attack still. They're offensively challenged, but Greg Schiano's got a good thing going there right now. So, and then obviously Miami is, we can argue about whether or not they should have 2 losses or 0. But the fact of the matter is that Miami is a very talented football team and has the capability, depending on how they're able to manage some of these ups and downs that they've experienced over the last couple of weeks, to take it all the way to Charlotte and maybe punch themselves a ticket for the playoff.
Yeah.
But Virginia Tech has lost to 3 teams that are playing, at minimum, competent football. That first loss, we didn't think that Vanderbilt was going to be a very competent team. We weren't really sure about Rutgers. I think we are starting to feel like Miami is at least a legitimate top 15 team, if not a top 10 team. So all of a sudden, these losses don't really sting as much, except from the standpoint that Virginia Tech easily could have won all 3 of these games.
Yeah.
So in one way, it doesn't sting as much, but in another way, it stings doubly, considering Virginia Tech had multiple chances to beat Vanderbilt, was leading in that game late. Certainly could have beat Rutgers. And then Miami, we can argue about whether or not Virginia Tech did beat Miami in that game. But the fact of the matter is that at 3-3, Virginia Tech still has a lot ahead of them. I don't think they have. I don't think the ceiling is achievable at this point. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us thought that their ceiling was maybe 10 wins. We can obviously throw that out the door. 9 wins. I don't think they're going to run the table. So this team's going to be a lot more towards the middle or bottom part of the projection that we had in the preseason. And that's a little frustrating considering all of the hype that we all bought into this offseason, all of the returning production, um, what you expected to be a coaching staff coming into their own in year three. They just haven't quite hit on a lot of those things yet. We haven't seen the growth from some of the players. We certainly have not seen the growth from the coaching staff, and it's created a team that, in a lot of ways, looks eerily similar to last year, which is not all that great, to be quite honest. But you're always going to think about the ones that you could have had, and had 5 plays this year gone differently. God, I sound like Frank Beamer at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Frank,
Um,
is that you?
yeah, if 5 plays are different, I mean, we're looking at a Virginia Tech team that's 5-1 or potentially even 6-0, and the margin of error has just not been there this year. They've had a really thin margin of error, and it's bitten them a couple times.
Virginia Tech's essentially lost the 50-50 games and then added one with Vanderbilt that I think a lot of people thought Virginia Tech was going to have in the bag. And quite honestly, Virginia Tech was a 2-score favorite
Yep.
going into that game for a reason. And it's, well, I mean, I mentioned this after the Miami game, the end result, and given how well Virginia Tech played and how that game ended up, it almost made me more mad about how Virginia Tech played against Rutgers, how Virginia Tech played against Vanderbilt, because it's not that you lost to these teams. This is something that we hammered home on those recap podcasts. It's not that you lost, it's how you lost, how you got there, right? It's the falling down 17 to Vanderbilt in the first half. It's falling down like 2.5 scores to Rutgers and having to claw your way back into it late at home. That's the stuff that was really frustrating. And then understanding that Virginia Tech had the capability to play like it did against Miami, play like it did against Stanford, where, I mean, we just did a Stanford recap where we really had trouble picking out something that Virginia Tech did real poorly. We were like, I mean, I guess they could have, scored on 1 or 2 more possessions in the first half instead of punted. It's like, okay, well, is that the nitpick? That sounds pretty good in a low possession game that Virginia Tech won by 4 touchdowns. So, I think that makes that all the more frustrating. I want to hit on a point you just mentioned. I think it's a good one about the thin margin of error between reaching your ceiling and essentially being at the bottom part of your projection, which, I think, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, but I mean, realistically, Virginia Tech's got a game against Clemson on the schedule still. Clemson might be the best team in the ACC. If not, they're very clearly, to this point, a top 2 team in the ACC. Yeah. Virginia Tech's going to be a home underdog in that game here in a few weeks. That's going to be a very tough one, right? And so we play that out like we think that game's going to go, and that's Virginia Tech's 4th loss. And going into the year, I think it was fair to think that Virginia Tech had a 10-win ceiling given the schedule and what they had returning and how we've seen this team play, right? And what we know they're capable of. The reality of the situation is Virginia Tech has not been consistent enough week over week, even within a given game, quarter by quarter, half by half, in 6 games this year. They just haven't been consistent enough, complementary enough on both sides of the ball, and there's been a lot of different reasons for that to be the case, and a lot of that's dependent on the game, obviously. There's also been some stuff that's reared its head repeatedly, and that was through the first 4 games, offensive line play was not very good. And that was an area we were concerned about going into the year. Now, I will say, I thought the offensive line, by and large, played pretty well against Miami. I thought they played very well against Stanford. So there's always still room for best 2 games of the year by far. So, I mean, there's certainly room for improvement there, and we've seen it over the last couple of weeks, and that's encouraging. Speaks to the whole bye week coming at maybe a bad time, even though some guys are banged up, like Bashal Tootin, Virginia Tech's best offensive player, maybe the best player on the entire team. he's hurt. He's been battling through some stuff. He's not injured, but he's hurt. He's banged up. I mean, every week
Yeah.
we see him with a new sleeve or a new leg brace, or like he's banged up, right? And
He's grinding right now.
so the bye week came at a really good week for him. But yeah, I don't know. It's been a weird start to the year. I will say I think a lot of people would have looked if Virginia Tech went out and beat Vanderbilt in the opener, or even beat Rutgers. Say you lost to Vanderbilt and beat Rutgers. If Virginia Tech was sitting here at 4-2 at the bye week, we all would have been like, all right. I mean, that was kind of we could have seen that coming. It's really that one Vanderbilt loss that really has put this season kind of in this weird spot now through 6 weeks where, Tech has basically got to outperform expectations by one win the rest of the season. They got to pluck one off somewhere. They almost did against Miami.
Yep.
They did not play well enough against Rutgers over 4 quarters, but they were in it late. Obviously didn't play well enough against Vanderbilt. So you're in the spot now the last 6 weeks where you got to pluck one off somewhere. And the struggle with that is that you look at the rest of the schedule with 3 losses already on the docket, and you still have Clemson. So now the one you got to pluck off is against a team that's won a national championship in the last 6 years. That still has like that head coach and has that team playing its best football in probably 4 years since Lawrence left. Now that's the one you got to get at home. So Virginia Tech's still searching for that signature win. I've seen that Sam Norman just mentioned that in the comments. I think it's true. Like Pry still needs a signature win. He hasn't had one. Tech still hasn't shown an ability to win a close game. That's been a recurring issue with this program. And in the 3 losses this year, they've all been by a score. It speaks to the 4 or 5 play thing, where Virginia Tech's really close to being a 4-2, 5-1, even a 6-0 football team. So it's been a mixed bag, I think, through 6 weeks. But I think Virginia Tech's been playing some encouraging football, at least through the last couple of games.
Yeah, and we talked about this after the Stanford game. The bye week did not come at a great time as it relates to momentum, but a lot's going to be said about this coaching staff, whether or not they're able to translate some of the positive gains that they have made over the last 2 weeks, especially on offense. Are they able to translate those across the bye week into a Thursday night game? I mean, that's a tough ask, especially for a coaching staff that's seemed to miss some of the basics. But one thing that I don't think that we've ever seen from this team is that they haven't they've never been a team that's quit, and this is a team that's picked themselves up off the mat after losses to Vanderbilt and Rutgers that were incredibly frustrating, and played their ass off against Miami, and then went out and took care of business in the exact fashion that you need to take care of business against Stanford. And they put themselves in a position where they may not be able to achieve everything that they wanted to this year, but there's still a fair amount for them to go get.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to beat Clemson. If anybody still has hopes of trying to go to an ACC title game, you got to beat Clemson. You got to beat them. That's like flat out. You got to win that game, especially since you already lost to Miami. Those are the two teams.
Go ahead and throw up this comment from Gregory Azar. Going 5-1 down the stretch, you win your bowl and you go 9-4. That's a 9-4 record is something that you can sell a lot easier than 8-4.
Yeah.
Those once you start to get like around 8 wins, those extra wins really matter. They really help change the narrative around your program when you can say we're a 9-win team, we're a 10-win team. That was one of the big things for Fuente in year 1, when he was able to really set that narrative that he had the ship going in the right direction. They lost 4 games that year. Now, one of those was an ACC championship game, but they were still able to get to the 10-win mark after winning the bowl. And to be able to tell folks that you got Virginia Tech back to that 10-win benchmark in year 1, that really did help set the narrative around the program that Fuente had things going in the right direction. And if Pry is able to get 9 wins, including a bowl win, under his belt, in year 3 with a roster that has got as many upperclassmen as this roster does, it would at least give proof of concept, which is a phrase we talked about a ton in Brent's first year and second year, that when the roster has enough experience and enough talent on it, that Pry can go out there and get a fair amount of wins, which Tech winning 8 to 10 wins, or excuse me, 8 to 10 games a year is about where we all want the program anyway.
I think it's what the reasonable expectation is that this team will be in the mix in the ACC and will be winning somewhere between 8, 9, on a really good year, 10 games a season. I think it's just a different sport now than when Virginia Tech was rattling off all those 10-win seasons. And
Yeah.
I've mentioned this a million times. Virginia Tech did themselves no favors in terms of capitalizing on momentum as a program with all the infrastructure and everything else when Beamer was rattling off all those 10-win seasons. They didn't really do themselves any favors for the next era of college football. And now they've been playing really this whole game of catch-up ever since. You mentioned the being able to sell going from 8 wins to 9 wins with a bowl game, going from 9 wins to 10 wins, like Fuente did in year 1, going into the bowl game 9-4 after that ACC title game loss. Well, I mean, how about in year 2, Virginia Tech was 9-3, had a chance to go into the Camping World Bowl against Mason Rudolph and a very good Oklahoma State team.
Yes.
They had a chance again, right, to win that 10th game.
Yep.
Have that opportunity. And that's really important early in a tenure. And we've seen Pry and his staff try to rebuild in the state of Virginia and get their feet back in the door at the local high schools and make hay. That stalls out if you're not winning games by year 3 and year 4, right? So I think last year, what was really encouraging in year 2 is that Virginia Tech really just looked like they were on the ascent in the second half of the season. This year, it's kind of like the whole growing pains thing and learning how to deal with the success that you had at the end of last year and then being able to parlay that forward. To date, this year, depending on how you look at it, Virginia Tech's in a spot where I still think they can achieve a lot the rest of the year. I think going 5-1, getting to a bowl game, having an opportunity to win a 9th game would be really important for recruiting momentum. I think it would be really important for how this program's viewed. I think so many people at the national level just started tuning Virginia Tech out once they lost to Vanderbilt in the opener. But if Tech starts rattling off some wins here and Tech goes into the Clemson game 6-3, there's a decent chance Tech will be ranked. And there will be some eyes back on the program. And if you play well in that game, didn't say win, just play well, look like you belong. I think the national view of Virginia Tech the rest of the way, especially if Tech just keeps winning games, keeps playing good football, I think the national narrative surrounding this program won't necessarily be as sour as it was after week 1, even with a 4-loss season. Looking at the close games that Tech lost, it's all about narrative, and you can form it a few different ways, right? On one hand, Pry hasn't won a close game. On the other hand, you could look up at the end of the year and say, wow, Virginia Tech lost by X total points. They lost by not that many points to 4 bowl teams, potentially. It's like, okay, well, you lost some close games to some good teams. At a national level, people are going to zoom out and be like, well, I mean, it's year 3, still rebuilding the thing.
Yep.
And this is where I want to get into the schedule discussion, Ricky, because we talked about the Clemson game, but Virginia Tech's got some winnable games left on the schedule. Tech's got BC on a Thursday night. Haven't seen a line for that yet, but I think Virginia Tech will be favored against Boston College at home on Thursday. They host Georgia Tech, which I think is a really important swing game.
Yes, it is.
They travel up to Syracuse, speaking of swing games. go up to Syracuse. The week before, you host Clemson. Then Duke and UVA to close it out. 2 games where I think Virginia Tech will be favored, even though looking at Duke's 5-1. I've made it clear I don't think they're as good as their record, but they are 5-1 so far. And Virginia, I think, has been actually playing pretty good football. So there are definitely some winnable games, but there are games here too where you could see Virginia Tech potentially slipping up outside of the Clemson game. So this is where the margin for error thing comes in, right? You lost that game up front against Vanderbilt, so now you got to be perfect the rest of the way. I'm not even talking just for the ACC. I'm just talking for like perception.
Yeah, the Thursday nighter is a huge game for the trajectory of the program. If you're going to try and make a run to make this Clemson game even somewhat nationally relevant in a few weeks, you've got to win the next 3. And it all starts with the first one, especially with this game being in a primetime slot at home. A slot that, quite frankly, the Hokies have not lived up to their historical billing.
Yeah.
I mean, people love to talk about how the atmosphere at Lane Stadium is incredible, which it is, and how Virginia Tech fans always show out, which this game is another sellout. But all that stuff doesn't matter as much when you're walking back to your home locker room with a loss.
Yeah.
So in order to restore some of that mystique or restore some of that past those past accolades, you've got to start winning games at home, especially in these primetime national television slots. And that's exactly what this Thursday nighter is going to be, obviously, depending on how the 3 games go. The game against Clemson could certainly be a primetime slot. Virginia Tech's got a lot ahead of them the next 3 weeks. And look, I understand that BC's taken a slight step back, but I still think they're an incredibly well-coached team, and Thomas Castellanos is just the kind of quarterback to give Virginia Tech all sorts of issues. Georgia Tech, I think that they've got some talent, but I still can't get a read on them. And then Syracuse, anytime you go up and play up there, it seems like it's an odd place to play. So lots left for the Hokies to try and build on here the next 3 weeks. But this is a critical 3-game stretch for not just the narrative around the program, but really the narrative around Brent Pry and his tenure specifically.
What's Virginia Tech's last big home win?
It's probably the 21 game against Carolina, which, I mean, that Carolina team ended up being really bad. But I mean, that was Carolina was 10th in that game. Am I right?
Yeah, it was the opener. Yep.
And it was the first game back from COVID. It was a sold out stadium after the lockdowns. And Virginia Tech, I think Amari Barno had like 5 sacks in that game or something like that. I mean, it was just nuts. And I mean, that might be their biggest home win in quite some time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm struggling to find another. I mean, 2018 against Pittsburgh.
Is that
that's the monsoon game? The monsoon, the monsoon, and but I mean that Pitt team didn't end up being great either.
Virginia Tech hasn't beaten a really good team at home.
No.
Since, I mean, maybe it's the Ohio State game. Or no, that was on the road. So
and that was on the road.
I'm not really sure, to be quite honest.
Yeah, which it tells you everything you need to know. All right, last 6 games. Can ask you this now. I know we said we were going to talk about other stuff, player-wise. But, I mean, the conversation is taking us here, and I just think this is natural.
Yeah.
Natural point in the conversation. Last 6 games. All right, so Virginia Tech sitting here at 3-3. BC, Georgia Tech at Syracuse, at Clemson. Home against Clemson, at Duke, home against UVA. Wow, I butchered that. One more time. BC at home, Georgia Tech at home, at Syracuse, home against Clemson, at Duke, home against UVA. That was much cleaner. Final 6 games of the year. Sorry, everybody. It's late. It's late. It's late. I've had a long week. How does Virginia Tech fare over the last 6 games?
In terms of record?
In terms of record. Gun to your head.
4-2.
Okay, that's okay. 4-2.
I think they're gonna lose one of the next 2 coming up,
and then Clemson,
and then I think they're gonna lose to Clemson. I think they can beat Duke and UVA. Duke's offense is just so pitiful.
They're so bad. Yeah,
it's awful. And a lot of people are trying to say it's not really on Malik Murphy, and I understand he's throwing to a bunch of, I don't know, a bunch of Jags, and Malik is just not that guy either. He's been erratic. He's got like a 1 RPO down where he throws the slant over the middle, and that's essentially the Blue Devil offense. So not that impressed with the Duke offense. They're still on a year-long ban, as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah,
I can't see, given what we've seen from prize teams up to this point, they haven't shown the ability to play consistent football for long stretches of the season. So I think that one of these BC or Georgia Tech games are going to go the wrong way. I'm starting to really cool on Syracuse. I was a little hot on them early in the year. Starting to cool on them considerably. Clemson, they didn't look all that great against Florida State, but they've got some dogs on both sides of the ball. So, yeah, I mean, I will say this: I think it's more likely that Virginia Tech goes 3-3 than 5-1.
Oh, I agree with that.
Which,
yeah, I agree with that.
Like Michael, if this team goes 6-6 this year, that's not cutting it.
No, I mean I agree with you. I think they end up at 4-2 in this final 6 game stretch, and they sit at 7-5, and they go into a essentially meaningless bowl game, unfortunately, and it ends up being a pretty disappointing year based on how fans were hoping this would go. I also agree with you that I think it's much more likely they go 3-3 down the stretch and 5-1, just because that would mean that this team would have to play much like they did a year ago. And I have not seen the consistency through 6 games with the talent on the roster, and also with a lot of these guys already having the experience of playing that way towards the end of last year. You would think that they would come out at the beginning of this year and continue that momentum, and they didn't do it. So now, even though they did it last year, right, I have to just believe they're going to do it again just because the calendar turns to mid-October. Like, I don't think that's necessarily how that works, number one. And number two, like, this is the same team. They've already been through that, so you would have thought they would have kept that going in the month of September, and they just flat out didn't do it. So I'm with you. I think it is more likely they go 3-3 than 5-1, especially when you consider the fact that there are a lot of teams where you don't have to squint that hard and be like, yeah, if Virginia Tech screws around a little bit, they're going to lose.
Yep.
And that's one of Boston College or Georgia Tech, maybe both. And then Clemson, you don't even have to screw up that much to lose that game. You could just be out-talented. So I'm with you. I haven't seen enough from a consistency standpoint, even though the last 2 weeks have been really encouraging. I haven't seen enough from a consistency standpoint. I need to see more of it to have the comfortability that Virginia Tech is going to like beat these teams on paper that I think they're better than. And to be honest with you, I look at the schedule and I think they're better than every team remaining on the schedule except for Clemson from a talent standpoint. I think they're better than BC, based on what I've seen from Georgia Tech, I think they're probably better than Georgia Tech. I think they're better than Syracuse. I think they're better than Duke and UVA. I don't think they're better than Clemson from a talent standpoint. And to be honest with you, like that Georgia Tech game, they're kind of on par from a talent standpoint. If you look at the 247 like team composite ranking, like they're Georgia Tech's a pretty good comp, but I think Virginia Tech's got the defense that Georgia Tech, I'm not totally sure they have, right? And they were so bad defensively last year, they definitely improved. But Virginia Tech's got the defense, and I think they have the offensive ceiling that's very similar to Georgia Tech, which is why I give Virginia Tech a narrow edge if they're both playing their best football. I'm with you. I think Virginia Tech drops one of the Boston College and Georgia Tech games, and I think they lose again against Clemson. And I think they go 4-2 down the stretch and end at 7-5 and play in like the pinstripe or something. I think that's how that's going to go down.
Well, we know how awesome the Pinstripe Bowl has been. Go ahead and highlight.
Clark made a cool helmet out of it, though. So.
Yes. Go ahead and highlight this comment from Sam Norman, because this is something that we discussed before the year. It did seem like Virginia Tech was going to have a hard time retaining some of their top players after the year, whether it be due to graduation, going pro, or maybe hitting the market for a bigger opportunity. And he's asking if the team doesn't live up to those expectations. Is it more likely that Virginia Tech can maybe retain some of the guys that we expected to bounce early? So we're looking at a guy like Kyron Drones, a guy like Mansour Delane. This is it for APR, right? He's done.
This is it. He's done. Yeah, he's done.
Trying to think who else. Maybe Gosnell, Xavier Chaplin. I mean, some of the guys that we expected, especially Drones and Delane, I think were the two that came to mind the quickest. Were guys that we expected to have good seasons and garner serious interest in the transfer portal after the year. I mean, hell, Kyron was garnering interest this offseason, supposedly. And I'm fairly confident that Mansour was being looked at by multiple programs as well. So does Virginia Tech have a better shot at retaining those guys after what could be a subpar season? I'll say this about Drones. He's got a lot to work on. He will not have any problem leaving if he wants.
Agree.
Somebody will bring him in.
Right on the money.
Something to consider, which I think we kind of included into our calculus at the beginning of the year, is that he's losing his top 4 guys at receiver. He's losing his running back. Does Drones, and we're way ahead of it now, Sam, so thanks for getting us into off-season discussions. Would Drones, coming off of what to this point has been a subpar season, a mediocre season at best, would he want to stake his future on an offense that is having to replace not just its best player at running back, but also its top 4 wide receivers on the depth chart?
Right. And the answer is no.
I think that, I was going to say, I think that question is pretty easy to answer.
Yeah, the answer is no. I mean, what would you do? If I could go somewhere else.
If this were, Mike, 15 years ago, guys would stay.
Right.
Because guys were committing for more than just, their NIL check or the buzz or something like that. But guys have different motivations now in a lot of instances, and we know that NIL plays a huge role in this stuff. So would it be beneficial for Kyron to jump to maybe a lateral move to a lateral Power 5 program, or maybe even jump down to the Group of 5 level, depending on what kind of options he has? So I have a fair. I'm fairly confident that Virginia Tech will have a different starting quarterback next year, which is disappointing because I would have loved to have seen Drones progress this year and then take that into a third season as the starter, which is something I feel like you don't get a lot of in college football anymore. Um, but unfortunately, I think that that's probably where that's headed.
Agree. I think I think they'd almost be better off if he had a really good year and then didn't quite have the NFL interest still. Because then I think the coaching staff could sell Drones into like, hey man, you're
You know the
performing really
system.
well in our system, right? We have a bunch of really talented young wide receivers that will play well, and I believe that Virginia Tech does. I'm pretty high on the young receivers. They've looked good when they've played. You could kind of sell that to them, but now it's like, all right, I just had a mediocre year. I'm going to my final year of college football, and I'm not going to have any of my top receivers back. And is this the best system for me anyway?
Yeah.
Which we weren't asking those questions last year because Virginia Tech was winning games, but then you start screwing around and you don't win games. These are the types of questions you ask.
Hmm.
So I fully acknowledge that I thought Drones was a great fit for the system. I still think he's a good fit for it. He just hadn't played well. And imagine that as soon as the offensive line starts playing better, Drones puts up his two best games of the year. So it's all kind of connected. But if you can
Yeah.
have a similar system elsewhere with veteran offensive line and good skill position talent, and they really just need a quarterback, I could see him jumping. So I'm with you. I wouldn't bet on him being the starting quarterback next year. Not because Virginia Tech would run him out. Tech would love to have him. The problem is a lot of other schools would love to have him too, even though he's got stuff to work on, like Ricky mentioned. He'll have no shortage of suitors.
Yeah.
LSU. This is a really bad kept secret. LSU wanted him to play quarterback for them this year. So, I don't think losing a game to Rutgers and Vanderbilt would keep LSU from calling him again if they feel like he's still a good fit in their offense. So
Is
that's just
this
something to keep in mind.
Nussmeier's last year?
No, he is a redshirt junior,
Okay.
I believe. So
So if he wants, he can come back.
yeah, he can come back. But they weren't sold on him going into the year, obviously, and
Yeah.
he was in a quarterback battle in camp, and Brian Kelly would have loved Kyron Drones, and LSU's offense has been fine, but they haven't been spectacular. Nothing would shock me. One other quick thing I want to touch on, something that's a little more uplifting. I think
Yeah.
for all the short, because we've talked about
That was a pretty depressing conversation.
that was a tough last 10 minutes or so. So something a little more uplifting. There are a lot of young guys on this team that have stepped up and have played really well. And they're like pry recruits or pry transfers. And they've stepped in. Caleb Spencer, obviously Virginia Tech was in on him on the recruiting trail. And then he transferred in from Miami, and he's emerged as a really good player on the defense. We've seen the younger guys step into the fold, especially on that defensive side of the ball, like Dante Lovett, for example, and play well and hold their own. Mose Phillips stepped in, played well. The development of Jalen Jones. I know Jalen Jones is a senior, but the development of Jalen Jones at a new position, really encouraging. There are a lot of things to like. Caleb Woodson,
Yeah.
a lot of things to like. I'm really encouraged, even though this year has been a little bit rocky. I am encouraged by the fact that a lot of the young guys have stepped up and played well. And that's not just on defense, but that's when younger guys have had the opportunity to get in the mix on offense. We've seen that too. Whether it be Prelo, whether it be Aiden Green, Benji Gosnell. I know he's been here a few years, but this is his first real taste of college football where he's playing like significant snaps, and he's been pretty good. So there are some aspects of this roster to be pretty encouraged about next year, obviously acknowledging that this is not going to be a veteran laden, senior laden team a year from now. But there are a lot of young guys who are getting in the mix and contributing. I think it's going to benefit Virginia Tech after the season.
For sure. Aiden Green's got a lot of praise thus far for what he's done as kind of the fourth/fifth receiver. He's gotten a fair amount of snaps. I'm a huge fan of PJ Prelo. I think he's extremely shifty and incredibly difficult to bring down considering his size. Guys, the Caleb Spencer one is the one that's I think jumped off the page the most to
Yeah.
folks, considering he wasn't really considered to be in the two deep after the off season and summer camp. Next thing you know, Virginia Tech's playing Russian roulette at linebacker, and Caleb Spencer finds his way on there at star, and he's been one of the most disruptive defenders thus far, in limited snaps, which is extremely encouraging. Caleb Woodson, definitely a guy who's playing a new spot at linebacker. He was a star. He's now being looked at more at will. So there's definitely been some younger players on the team that are going to have to step into leadership roles sooner rather than later, just because of all of the guys that are on this roster that are not going to be back next year. Antoine Powell-Ryland, Aeneas Peebles, Sam Brumfield, Dorian Strong. On offense, I mean, all of the receivers, Bashal Tootin. There's
all of everybody on offense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there really are going to be a lot of snaps up for grabs next season, and those younger players, Dante Lovett, Mose Phillips, PJ Prelo, those are guys that are going to be in the spot to fight for those reps next year, and the early returns are good. They haven't played a ton, but the early returns are good.
Yeah. I am interested to see how this is more of an off-season conversation, but this is the stuff you can think about on a bye week. I'm interested to see how the coaching staff approaches the transfer portal because of how some of these young guys have played. You want to add talent, but you also don't want to block development of young players who you think are going to be significant contributors. And if that means taking a half step back in the upcoming season because you think it's going to be worth it and it's going to pay long-term dividends for the next 2 or 3 seasons and the next few iterations of this program, I think you probably roll the dice there and hope that a young team picks off a game or two rather than bring in a guy who's going to be a 1-year stopgap and blocks the development of a guy who've you seen some good
Mike,
play out of this year.
It's a lot easier to do that when you build yourself a leash the year before, which
that was going to be my very next point.
Brent Pry can do that if he has a good stretch run here.
Was going to be my very next point. The path that he chooses is probably going to be very dependent on how Virginia Tech finishes the final 6 games of the season. That was going to be my very next point. You took the words out of my mouth, and you're right on the money. We are in lockstep, lockstep there. All right, so Virginia Tech's 3-3, 1-1 in the ACC. I think we agree Virginia Tech has to run the table in order to make the ACC title game. They'd have to beat Clemson and win the rest.
Not only would they have to run the table, they might need some help considering how many teams are in the ACC this year. And they've already lost the tiebreaker to one of the teams they're likely going to be fighting with.
Yeah. SMU still hasn't lost a game in conference. You play Clemson, so you control some of your destiny there. You play Virginia. You don't play Pitt. I'm just looking at the teams in front of Virginia Tech in the ACC.
I mentioned this last on the recap. I mean, most of the teams ahead of them in the standings at the moment, Virginia Tech still has to play.
Right. The exceptions are
SMU,
Louisville,
Pitt,
SMU,
Louisville,
and Pitt.
Yeah,
Yep.
Which are some notable exceptions considering Pitt is having their best early start to the season in quite some time. SMU seems to have really turned things around up to this point after what was a really, really shaky start. And Louisville is right on the cusp of being a really good team, but they're just not quite there.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. Real quick before we wrap up tonight, there's a proposal floating around about a super league, and who could have possibly seen that coming? And they're going to be divided into regions. I'm going to do this whole rant again. They're going to be divided into regions. They're going to play. They're going to play teams in their region. We'll call them conferences.
Those
We're going to do that whole
conferences may
thing.
be split up into divisions.
Might be split up into divisions, and the Super League we'll call it the FBS, and everybody else, the Group of Five, and everything else that could be called the FCS. It's my favorite. It's my favorite rant because this thing really is cyclical.
Oh man.
My second favorite thing coming out of this was all a Ross Dallinger report, by the way, about like the 70 or so schools. This wild proposal basically says the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, and SEC would all essentially make up the Super League of college football. It'd be the Power Four, and they'd split off from the group of five. Okay, fine. That's nothing new. That's not a huge surprise. My favorite thing this week, and by favorite I mean I hate it, is that the SEC and the Big Ten are meeting in Nashville this week to discuss scheduling and partnerships and what they want college football to be and how they want to negotiate the college football playoff with ESPN, because that's who's got the TV rights, and the next iteration of whatever that's going to be. And my favorite thing about this is they're all talking, Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti, the two commissioners of the conferences that essentially hold all the power in the sport right now. Sankey has taken the stance of like, oh, well, why would I join the Super League? The SEC is the Super League. And the Big Ten's like, yeah, why would we join the Super League? They're basically accomplished as we sit here on October 10th. Congratulations to them on winning the you-know-what measuring contest. Like, that's what essentially they're doing in the middle of the season, is letting you know how long it is, which is really annoying for like the rest of us that just want to watch football. They're doing this whole like meeting thing and saying, "Oh, I don't know about this Super League over here." I don't know where this is heading, Ricky. All I want to say about this is that I'm really annoyed. This is really annoying. That's it. I'm annoyed by it.
It seems like these conversations always seem to pick up steam when we're trying to enjoy the actual games on the field.
Yep.
Which is a point that you've made, and you've been tapping the sign for weeks now that they just can't help themselves.
Yeah.
They cannot help
can't.
themselves. I mean, yes, if we're being honest, the teams probably do need to separate from the NCAA for football only. Football realignment is destroying much of the rest of collegiate athletics, especially the Olympic sports, which is an incredible shame considering, as someone who did not participate in Olympic sports, but that is a real part of the collegiate experience. Mike, I know that you and I both went to Tech. We probably both knew a lot of Olympic sports athletes. That is such a crucial part of the whole point of college and going to university. Football is really ripping that to shreds. And as much as I do love college football and I want the future of the sport to be secure, I am getting a little tired of it running roughshod over the rest of the student athletes that are not angling to be employees and are just trying to go to class and compete in the sports that they enjoy.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I absolutely hate the concept of the SEC and the Big Ten doing their own thing, which is where I think if I had to pick a way that this is headed right now, that's what I would pick. That the SEC and the Big Ten are going to find a way to separate off. They're going to take whatever remaining brands that they want with them, and they're going to create some sort of system that, obviously benefits the biggest names of those conferences, regardless of results on the field, which was always a sham, right? Well, we've seen this with Florida State now. who was such an advocate for results-based payout for media rights.
Been quiet on that lately, haven't they?
And all of a sudden, Florida State is, as you guys have said on the Basketball Conference podcast, which if you don't listen, you should, a bag of ass.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, well, now we need to try different metrics. How about we look at TV viewership instead of results? So, long story short, those in power are going to make whatever decisions that they can to retain that power and expand it. Greg Sankey's right. He doesn't really have much of an incentive to join some Super League when ESPN is paying him $700 zillion a year and giving him a back massage while they do it.
It's not the only thing they're giving him.
We were both thinking it. You just said it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It is extremely frustrating and annoying to consistently have to talk about. This is like the third episode of a preview, Mike, that we've had to discuss some sort of realignment
or something,
or reorganization of the sport, and I'm over it.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. This is just.
See, the other part is though we can't just ignore it. We have to. Well, we have to address these things because this is the reality of the sport that we have all grown up enjoying, and the sport that we still enjoy.
It's an editorial decision, like Joey and I just flat out we're just not addressing it. Like we were like, yeah, we saw it's happening. We are not talking about it right now. We're going to talk about it in the off season. Here we're like, we're just going to fire it in. And I'm fine with either approach, by the way. I'm comfortable talking about, I'm comfortable not. I'm comfortable, very comfortable making my stance known that I hate it. I hate it. And
it's not great.
No. And it's a few things can be true at once, right? Like I think there's a lot of parity in college football right now. Once you get outside of like the top 3 or 4 teams, I think there's a ton of parity within conferences right now that we really haven't seen in a really long time. And I think a lot of that is because of NIL and teams being able to.
I mean, look at Pitt. Pitt is a great example.
Right. And the irony of the Pitt. Well, and the irony of the Pittsburgh situation is that Jordan Addison's recruitment away from Pittsburgh to USC was really like the first big name to be tampered with in this NIL transfer portal era. And now I think Pitt is almost like a few years later, they're almost like a beneficiary of it, just how bad they were last year. They overturned the offensive coaching staff and they have this really good freshman quarterback that they brought in, and they're off to the races, and they're really good. They're going to cash my win total ticket, I think, of 5.5. I think they're going to cash that.
They're going to smoke that.
Yeah, I got that plus money too.
You can start spending that money now, Mike.
I run that by my wife, but yeah. Yeah, I hate it. I think in a lot of ways there's a lot of good stuff, right, with like roster parity and stuff like that, but there's a lot of stuff I really don't like. I think the people that are only into like the power conference football and the huge matchups, I think they're like, all right, I don't really care what happens. It's like the casual fan that is like really into the NFL, and like they're like, oh, this could be just like the NFL is, where they got like 32. Yeah, I don't want it to be like the NFL. Like that's not why I love college football.
It's not supposed to be.
It's not supposed to be. Like I was watching James Madison in Coastal Carolina earlier. Like,
yeah, there we go.
That's what it's about. It's about Tuesday night action. It's about Pac-12 after dark. That's what this sport's about, man. It's not just about Oregon's playing Ohio State this weekend. I'm really excited to watch it. I will be watching. I'm not immune to it. I'm going to be watching Oregon and Ohio State on Saturday night. I'm really excited to watch it. It's going to be a great game against, pitting 2 teams that have a chance to win a national championship this year. It's going to be great. I think it's going to be great television, and it's going to be awesome. And there are a lot of big games on Saturday, but there are a lot of games in the ACC also flying under the radar. Like North Carolina, Georgia Tech is a huge game. Like that is a huge Georgia Tech. They're 4-2. They're 2-2 in conference play. They got to win this game in order to keep their conference title hopes alive. Because by the way, Rick, a conference title used to matter. It used to matter for something.
Yeah.
Like, and look with the ACC, yeah, it matters because you win your conference title, you go to the playoff, and that's great. But these other group of 5 schools, like they're playing for a conference title, and they may not go to the college football playoff. But do you think winning a conference title still matters to those kids? It should. And we're saying with this playoff that it's just not all that matters is winning the national championship. When in reality, only like 5 or 6 teams year over year really have a shot to win it. A lot of times it's less than that, and only like 12 to 15 recruit and attain talent necessary to win a national title year over year. So like the teams may change, but the overall premise is the same no matter what the playoff size is, no matter who's in what conference. It's always going to be 5 or 6 teams in the mix, and they're always going to be from the same pool of like 15 teams that are always recruiting and pouring in money for the college football aspect of things in a way that other athletic departments across the country just don't. Like Ohio State wants to compete for a national title in football every single year. Virginia Tech does not. Like Virginia Tech does not. They don't spend like that. It's just different.
Spend like that.
And can't spend like that. And it's just different. And I'm using Virginia Tech's word, Virginia Tech podcast, but there are a million different examples
Use
of that.
Any middle of the road P4 program you want.
Indiana,
Minnesota,
having a good year. They're not
Arizona,
recruiting.
Like you can pick anyone.
Yeah, Oklahoma State, bad example. Utah. I mean, Utah's a great developmental program.
Capped. They're definitely capped.
But their ceiling is capped, and they're a great developmental program. But they don't recruit like a national title contender. They develop like one, but they don't recruit like one.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why I hate it, because other stuff used to matter other than just like winning the national title. I know I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of people, and then a lot of people are like, well, I don't care. Like a lot of people are like, who cares? It's just the way that it is. And I get it. Now, I don't care what your stance is really. I don't have to like it, just as, you're certainly entitled to like it. It's fine if you're into the whole conference realignment thing. I don't know why we can't. Why you're just wrong. And why can't we do this in the off season? That drives me nuts too. Why can't we do some of this in, April, May, February? Like, why does it have to be in September, October, November when we've had all off season? That drives me crazy. I want the focus to be on the games.
Speaking of the games, Michael, you want to make some picks?
Yeah, let's do it real quick.
Clemson.
There's only a few.
Yeah, Clemson's 10th in the country. They're at Winston-Salem against the Steamin' Deeks. Not very steaming anymore. Clemson's a 20.5-point favorite in this game. I mentioned, Mike, that they kind of were playing with their food against Florida State. Not going to play with their food in this game. Give me the Tigers to cover 20.5.
Let him. Wake's not going to. I don't think Wake scores here. Lay him.
You don't think they score?
I don't think they score. But I don't think they can score with. I don't think they can score with Clemson. No, they'll score. Not that much.
Predicting a shutout. Noon on the CW, everyone's favorite channel. Georgia Tech. You mentioned this one. 4-2, already 2 losses in the conference. They're on the road against the Fighting Mac Browns, who are 0-2 in the conference. Georgia Tech's a 4-point favorite. The pivotal game for the Jackets. Give me the Jackets to win this one and cover.
I bet Carolina at 5.5. That is some value because it's been bet down to 4, and I'm really glad I have that 1.5 to work with. I am less interested in Georgia Tech in North Carolina just outside of field goal. Yeah, I think Georgia Tech wins this game close.
Very
Close.
Gotcha.
Very close. Yeah. But I bet it at UNC plus 5.5. So I'm less interested in it at UNC plus 4.
Yeah. 3:30 on NBC. Stanford coming off of their loss to the Hokies. They get 4-1 Notre Dame, who's 11th in the country. Notre Dame's a 22.5-point favorite in South Bend. Mike, that's a lot of points. I don't know what the status on Daniels is.
Probably out.
Okay, give me the Irish.
Lay 'em. Yeah. Lay 'em.
Justin Lamson, not good.
And that Notre Dame defense is better than Virginia Tech's. Lay 'em.
Yes. Yeah. 3:30 on ESPN. The Calgorithm is now 3-2. Sorry, guys. Pitt ranked at 5-0, 1-0 in the conference. Pitt is only a 3-point favorite at home. I think the Calgorithm is slowing down, boys. We were Mike especially was really high on the Bears after their hot start.
I was.
Pitt's gonna go to 6-0, man. Give me Pitt.
Man, this line is weird. 58.5 total. Like Cal hit on some explosive plays against Miami that I don't think they can do like game over game. This Cal offense has been pretty ass this year. And their defense has been good. So I don't understand why the total's 58.5 and Pitt's only laying a field goal. Weird line. Give me Pitt. But this is a weird one. I did not bet this game. I will not bet this game. Weird one.
Yeah, 3:30 also on the ACC network. Louisville, they're down to 3-2. They're on the road at Virginia. Louisville road favorites, 7.5. Give me UVA with the points.
Yeah, man.
I think Louisville wins the game.
Mm-hmm.
But give me the Hoos with that many points, Mike.
It's a lot of points.
Virginia.
With how Louisville's been screwing around the last couple of weeks in particular, and some of the mistakes they've made, and how Virginia's been playing, Virginia's just been pretty consistent so far. You know what I mean?
Mike,
that's a lot of points.
Mike, if Virginia does not cover the spread here, we need to lead off the pod, or maybe you guys can do it on the BC pod with the Mickey Mouse audio.
Yeah.
Last game, 8 p.m. ACC Network primetime slot. Syracuse on the road at NC State. Syracuse 3-point favorite. Mike, NC State stinks.
They do.
Syracuse a little sus, but I'll take the orange.
Night games in Raleigh are no fun. NC State. Maybe outright. And I agree with you. NC State stinks. And Syracuse, I think, is better. But this is another line where I'm like, shouldn't Syracuse be like a 6-point favorite? This is weird, huh? So
Vegas knows.
I know.
That's it. Pretty small slate. However, some big games throughout the country. Obviously, Ohio State, Oregon. We've got the Red River rivalry. Texas and Oklahoma.
Ole Miss, LSU.
Yep, Ole Miss, LSU. Florida at Tennessee is an interesting game.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas State at Colorado.
Fun one.
Which is not quite Pac-12 after dark. I guess this is Big 12 after dark, which I'm here for it. Over under 2.5 touchdowns for Ashton Jeanty against Hawaii.
I saw he was at minus like 115 to score 3 touchdowns last week. 3 or more touchdowns against Utah State. The fact that you couldn't even get that at plus money is preposterous. He is so good, Ricky. He's so good. He's averaging 9 yards per carry against 8 or more men boxes this year. He's ridiculous.
He's on pace for 41 touchdowns.
Yeah, and if he was playing the second half of games, he'd still be on pace for 3,000 yards. He'd be shattering Barry Sanders' record. He's not even playing the second half of some of these games because they're so out of hand.
That's nuts.
He's ridiculous, dude. He's so good.
Anything else before we wrap this up?
over 2.5. What would you say? 2.5 touchdowns?
Yeah, over under 2.5 Ashton Jeanty touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, a better opponent than Utah State, but yeah, I think he gets there because I think he's going to be in the game longer this week. He would
Certainly could be.
have cruised there last week.
Boise is 20.5 favorites in whatever time zone that is.
Yeah.
Make sure you're listening. If you are, obviously you're listening to this. Rate, review, subscribe. Make sure you are subscribing on the YouTube channel. Tap the bell so you get the notifications. Follow, subscribe, whatever audio you're using to listen, whether it's Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. Shout out to Count's Family Pharmacy. Shout out to Home Field Apparel for supporting the show. Andrew will be back Sunday, hopefully. Mike, you got anything else?
Go Hokies.